Only mode.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Lance French, and I am the Director of Marketing for W&M Environmental, and I would like to welcome you to our webinar on understanding OSHA's new NEP on PSM and EPA's RMP final rule. Our speakers today for our W&M's Conan Reed, Don DeRavage, Lori Siegelman, along with environmental attorney Cindy Bishop. Welcome, everybody.
Good morning.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you for joining us today. But before we get started, I wanted to go over a few housekeeping items. If you guys have any questions, please send them to me through the chat box on your GoToWebinar window. If we don't get to your questions right away, I'll make sure that they see it and we'll get an answer to you as soon as possible. We are recording this webinar and it will be available to rewatch later this afternoon, along with the slides that they used. I will be sending an email with the link when they are made available. So enough out of me. Let's get to it. Conan, I believe you're up first. I think Conan might have muted himself and there he is.
Ah, there we are.
Okay,
you had me muted, Lance.
Okay. Always blame the host. That's a good one. Okay, so Conan, take it away.
Good morning. My name is Conan Reed. I am going to be talking about the OSHA's NEP on PSM, and Don DeRavage is also with us today, and he will be speaking as well and answering any questions. So your first question may be what exactly is a NEP? What is an NEP? And that is OSHA's National Emphasis Program. If Lance would go to the next slide. So what OSHA has is when OSHA has issues with a program area where they see health and safety in the workplaces are falling during certain areas of OSHA standard, where employees may be at risk, they may issue what is called a national emphasis program. And so when they see trends in situations where employees are having accidents or plants are having incidents, they issue these. They may have a national emphasis program, they may have what's called regional emphasis programs or a local emphasis program. And what we're talking about today is the national emphasis program. Go to the next slide, Lance. Currently, OSHA has some NEPs that are out, and the one we're talking about specifically is the Process Safety Management NEP. This one was just released at the beginning of the year. They also have some that are out on combustible dust. Federal agencies are affected. They have hazardous machinery, hexavalent chromium. There's one for silica. As you may know, there's a new silica standard out. Lead, primary metal industry, shipbreaking and trenching and excavation are all part of this OSHA's NEPs. OSHA had some previous NEPs that were one that was in 2009 that affected petroleum industries, and this was a PSM that was directed towards petroleum industries in 2009, and then they did another one in 2011 that basically did not cover petroleum industries, but it covered excluded the petroleum industries and covered chemical manufacturers, and that one was replaced by this one on January 17th. So this new NEP replaced the previous NEP on January 17th of this year. This new one, this one covers not just the petroleum industries, but it also covers chemical as well. So it's going to be anybody that is that falls under PSM. This NEP may affect you guys, and it you may have some questions of whether or not your facility will be targeted by this, and we hope to address those today. And just to give you a heads up, who is targeted, what type of facilities will be, targeted by these NEPs, and whether or not if there's some exceptions to that. The new NEP will be conducted the same manner for petroleum industries as well as for other PSM facilities, so that it's the same for both. All right, not just your SIC code, but your NAICS code may also put you in this targeted special emphasis program. So you can, in most cases, match up your SIP code or your NAICS with the OSHA's program directive. So when they issue these NEPs, they send out a program directive to tell the regions how the NEPs are going to work. And if you guys find yourself in that list, it's a good chance that you may find yourself being targeted by one of these inspections. However, this new one uses a little different methods for establishing these targeted facilities, and we want to kind of address that and let you all kind of understand how it works and whether or not your facility may be targeted, or if you may be you find yourself excluded by that because you may be you fall under some of the exclusions or exemptions from having being targeted by this NEP. Any questions so far on OSHA's NEP? All right.
Nope, I think we're good.
All right. OSHA is going to use 4 sources for targeting this. In most cases, a lot of companies that fall under PSM also fall under RMP, and you may have different programs for RMP. You may fall under Program 1, Program 2, and Program 3. So OSHA is going to use those Program 1s, 2, and 3s to select whether or not you fall under that NEP. So if you are a Program 1, 2, or 3, you'll be affected. If you're an explosives or pyrotechnics manufacturing company, so if your NAICS or SIC code matches that, you would be targeted by this NEP. Also, OSHA's integrated management system, this is where they have a database that shows them what industries and incidents have been out there, and they can pull from that to develop this list. Also, once OSHA has developed a list, they will also get knowledge from the local offices. So the local offices have a lot of knowledge of what companies are in their region that fall under this PSM. And so what they'll do is they'll use all these sources to generate a master list to determine what companies and what facilities may be targeted from that master list. Here in Texas, we're in Region 6, so a master list will be sent out for the Region 6 area directors. They will look at the master list, and they will identify potential companies that may be affected by that. You can go ahead to the next slide, please. They'll categorize that list into categories 1, these are the facilities with NAICS codes likely to have ammonia used for refrigeration. So that would be their only highly hazardous chemical, would just be the ammonia system. Any category 2s, which are the petroleum refineries, if you fall under those with the NAICS codes, or if you're a chemical manufacturing company and you have an NAICS code of 325, you would fall under this category 3. And we talked about category 1, 2, or 3 is also the companies that are following in with their RMP status. And then any facilities likely not covered by this 1, 2, or 3, this would be companies that don't fall under into one of those, but may have a lot of flammable liquids on site or things that would kick them into that. And some of these may not follow under the RMP status, but they would fall into PSM based on their flammable liquids stored and used on site.
Hey, Conan, we do have a question. I think it was from the last slide. It says, will any of the 4 sources carry more weight than others when OSHA decides who to target?
No, and we'll get into that shortly. So OSHA is going to, once they generate this master list, they'll send it out to those directors, and then there's a percentage that they randomly select from. So we'll get into that shortly. So there's not necessarily waiting, unless, of course, you guys fall under what's called an unscheduled inspection, where you've had an incident. So will your facility be targeted? And that's really what a lot of you guys want to know. So that master list that OSHA provides those regional offices, those area directors may also add any known PSM covered facility that's on that list that was not on that. They will add those. And then any facility that's likely to be covered by PSM, just based on their knowledge of the areas. There may be some companies on there that are out of business, so they'll mark those for deletion. Some of you may be in OSHA's VPP, so you fall under OSHA's Voluntary Protection Program. And the good news is, if you fall under that, you're going to be excluded from this. So they'll mark you guys for deletion, or any of the smaller employers that fall into that OSHA SHARP program. You guys would be also excluded, unless, of course, you have an incident that kicks you into it by what is called a non-programmed inspection. But this is just for the programmed inspections. So also not mark any for deletion if there's already been an inspection under the previous NEP in the last 3 years. So the one that just ended recently, that this one replaced, the one from 2011, if you were inspected then in the last 3 years, you would not fall into this new NEP for inspection. Once they've returned that list for final processing, it'll be approved by the federal OSHA, and then that list will be then sent out to those regional offices. So the difference is we may have what's called a programmed inspection, which is what we just talked about. This is where OSHA's developed that list, but there may be unprogrammed, and this will be, if you've had an incident or someone calls in, so you had an accident that's involving in your PSM system, or a catastrophe in that covered process area, or you had somebody call in for a complaint. That may kick you into this unprogrammed inspection. So even if you're an OSHA VPP or in that SHARP program, if you have an incident, you may be still subjected to this unprogrammed inspection.
Conan, we have another question. Do you have to be in both SHARP and OSHCON, or just one to fall off the list?
If you fall under OSHA VPP or SHARP, you would be excluded, unless, of course, you guys have an incident. So you would fall out of the programmed inspection list. And as far as OSHCON would not be part of that, so you would still be falling under the OSHA programmed inspection. For Region 6, OSHA still hasn't decided how many, what the goal is for targeting, but the Category 1 facilities, or Category 1, 25% of the programmed inspections will be done. So there'll be a list of those Category 1s. Those regional areas will do 25% of the total companies on that list. So that was their targets. We said for category 2, that's going to be, the goal is going to be located across all regions, so they haven't decided yet how many that's going to be. So it'll be based on that, the number of refineries across each region, and they'll get a goal based on that. Category 3, it'll be approximately 45% of the total programmed inspections, and category 4s will receive around 35 or 30% of the total programmed inspections. So if you, depending on where you fall, if you're a category 1, 2, 3, or 4 type facility, your chance for being inspected is based on that. We talked about exemptions. So OSHA does have some exemptions out there. We talked about the exemptions for VPP and SHARP status. So if you are one of those, you would not be targeted by the programmed inspection. You may be targeted by the unprogrammed based on any kind of incident that you may have had on site. But if you're an employer that employs 10 or fewer employees in the past 12 months, and your lost workday rate is below the industry average, you are exempt from that inspection. If you're a farm with 10 or fewer employees that does not have a temporary labor camp in the past 12 months, you would also be exempt. And then OSHA has, for companies that have a really high or a low incident rate, where they've have a really good safety record, they have a list, and there's that appendices, Appendix A, and we have a link to it if you guys want to check that out and to see if your NAICS code falls into that. But if you do fall into it, you would also be exempt from these programmed inspections. That's not to say you wouldn't get unprogrammed if you fall into that and have an incident. So how does the NEP work? If you are targeted and OSHA does decide to come out and do a programmed inspection of your facility, what they'll do is they'll have an opening conference with you, and during that opening conference, they're going to verify if the PSM applicability. So they may have gotten it wrong. You may have been on the list because they thought you might have been a PSM facility. So they're going to verify whether or not the PSM applies to your site, and then they'll verify whether or not you're exempt based on those exemptions we discussed. So if you are a VPP site and they didn't have you on the list, or if you're a SHARP site, or if you fall into one of those NAICS codes, they're going to verify that. And if you're exempt, they won't do the inspection. They'll request your program documentation, so they want to see your PSM program and all related materials to that. They'll want to see any PSM components, any kind of inspections you guys have been doing. They'll want to see previous HAZOPs or PHAs that you have done, so you'll have to gather all that information. And they'll want to know exactly what processes that you have that fall under PSM to help them get a better understanding before they do that initial walk around. So, and so before that walk around, they're going to decide what areas you guys have that fall under PSM. They'll perform an initial walk around, and during that walk around, they may not only just see findings that are related to PSM, but they may see some issues that are related to other areas, and they may issue a citation or violation based on something that's non-related to PSM during this inspection. They'll select which PSM covered process to evaluate, and what they may do, if you guys have ever been inspected by OSHA before and had your PSM covered process inspected, and you have another PSM covered process that they haven't looked at, they would look at that one instead of the one that they previously inspected. So they're going to look at any new processes that you may have that fall under PSM.
Hey, Conan, this is Don DeRavage, just real quick on some of the other things that they might want to consider, and certainly the heavy industries of refining and heavy chemical usage that are driving it. I'd be careful about ensuring that you've looked at your incidents that have been potentially PSM related or certainly coming from a PSM process. Those are a sort of the automatic and low-hanging fruit that a PSM inspection group will look to provide the focus that way. And that means that you've done an adequate job of investigating the incident as well as providing some recommendations. And it's a critical element because it'll lead to the other things listed on the slide about how the process was done, how the PHA was performed, why didn't you catch that incident during the PHA process, and or during that PHA and the recommendation was spelled out, did you attempt to and or schedule the repair that was identified in that? Those PSM issues come back to bite a lot of things, and even as we'll hear later with the RMP, it has a carryover that way too.
Yeah, that's correct. So OSHA will also, they're going to interview and talk to any contractors that you may have on site or any temporary workers, because they would be also included into this. And so once they've established who those people are, they may go out and talk to them, do some interviews, and then after they have finished, they will issue the citations, and after that, then you can you may actually get into requesting your informal meeting with them and that sort of thing to discuss those citations. And this is something that I'm familiar with, that OSHA considers any violation of a PSM standard condition that's likely to cause death or serious physical harm. So any violations of that are going to be a serious violation. So all the ones I have seen have all been classified as serious, and they don't normally classify them as other than serious. So the maximum penalty for that now is $12,675 per violation. There are some discounts based on the size of your facility, so you may not receive a $12,675 citation. It may be like they may give you a 10% discount based on your facility size. But once they've issued that penalty and you've accepted that, if you haven't abated those PSM related or any other related citation or violations that they've had, if you haven't abated those by the abatement date they've given, they start kicking you for, $12,475 or $71 per day beyond that abatement date. And then you may fall into what's called a willful or repeat violations based on the fact that you may have already been, you may have been targeted by them before and come out. And so some of these violations may be repeat or a willful violation, and then it would be much more expensive at over $100,000 per violation. So you want to get those fixed beforehand. We talked about the previous NEPs that OSHA had, and the one from 2009, the one that was related to the petroleum refineries, these are their most frequent citations that they had. So most of them were from mechanical integrity. A lot of those citations, and we can delve down into this in a minute, you had some that were PSI related, and so those were the top ones with operating procedures and then PHA. The least amount was the employee participation. So most of these chemical companies do have a fair bit of employee participation, so they didn't see that quite as much. So it was mostly with mechanical integrity and process safety information. Specifically, these citations, on the number of citations, were compliance with the REGA gap. That's good management practices. A lot of companies haven't corrected deficiencies that may have been found. We also with the PHA findings. So they've done the PHA. They didn't address the findings, so they didn't correct those. So there were a lot of citations based on that. Not establishing or implementing a management of change system. Not having process instrumentation diagrams were either missing or they weren't correct for their facility, or no written mechanical integrity procedures. May have been PHA related facility siting, so that didn't include that information on the PHA. The safe work practice weren't established, and then with mechanical integrity, we got inspections and testing frequency either not being done or the frequency was inadequate. Relief system designs were not adequate, or they didn't have emergency shutdown in their operating procedures. And I have seen them specifically address that more recently with emergency shutdown procedures. So the operating procedures were all current and correct, except for they didn't have an emergency shutdown procedure in that operating procedure.
And I think you're going to see from even the next slide, as you look at the chemical NEP side of it, that process safety information may stand out as something as why is that so often cited, and some of the things that get rolled into that are the things most overlooked, and I think that's certainly where OSHA will come out as they're reviewing things and notice maybe a code stamp on a pressure vessel's not there, or because you've replaced it, or maybe the RV is not listed in the list of RVs that are part of the process, and the carryover connection back to mechanical integrity. Do you inspect it and how often? And that's where a lot of these come into and why it's so often cited. Those are some of the findings we've seen here recently.
No, thank you. Additionally, for these 2011, the previous NEP for chem, still with the REGA gap, mechanical integrity written procedures, mechanical integrity equipment deficiencies, still with another management change. So they did see very similar issues with these chemical facilities that they did with the petroleum refineries that they had done in 2009. Okay, I want to follow up if anyone has any additional questions. If not, we will start with the RMP. That'll be presented by Cindy Bishop and Lori Siegelman.
Great, thanks Conan. This is Cindy Bishop with C. Bishop Law. Been an environmental attorney for a while, do a lot of work with W&M Environmental. Yeah, there's a lot of overlap, as you'll see here. There's a lot of overlap between the risk management program and OSHA's PSM. But the agencies don't interact with each other. So you could come out, get an inspection by OSHA, and they'll have certain findings, and then later you could get inspected by EPA or at the same time, and you might get citations for the same thing. So it makes this whole concept that much more important because you can get dinged twice by two different agencies. So legal, here's my legal slide here. This is enforced by or overseen by EPA. The rules are at 40 CFR Part 68. So if you want to know what you need to do, You can read the rules, or they have a really nice set of guidance documents that actually break down in a lot of detail what's required. So I highly recommend, if you have any questions, that you go to this link and pull up some of the guidance documents, because they are extremely helpful. Next slide. Now, I was all excited to talk about the revisions to the risk management program. I read the Federal Register, I got all up on that, and as you'll see here, it's kind of fizzled here recently, but I was ready to talk about them. So I'll give you a little bit of background and tell you what's going on here with these. In 2013, in response to the West Texas fertilizer plant explosion, the Obama administration issued Executive Order 13650, which mandated that EPA revise the RMP regulations and tighten up the program, basically. So changes were proposed by EPA, and those were the final regulations were published in January of this year, and were supposed to be effective on March 14th. And they got a boatload of comments, and there was a lot of controversy. For example, EPA was going to require, certain situations that these companies be subject to independent third-party audits. So they couldn't use like a consultant that they had a relationship already. They couldn't do it internally. They had to hire an independent third party to audit their program. And that was seen as highly burdensome and costly by the consultants and lawyers. We saw this to be a great opportunity for more work, but it was very controversial, and there was issues about communication with the LEPC, and doing practice drills and stuff, and there was like, well, what if it's a volunteer LEPC? How do you get in touch with them? There were a lot of questions, so there's a lot of controversy associated with these changes. So EPA decided to postpone the effective date of these changes until June 19th. Then they received many petitions for reconsideration from a variety of states, and organizations as well, like API. So now, just recently, they decided to postpone the effective date. They're proposing to postpone the effective date until February of 2019. And they had a public hearing on it just last week, and you can submit additional written comments on whether you think this should be postponed, and the end of the comment period is May 19th. So coming up next month. In my opinion, the way the administration is, I would bet money that this most likely will be postponed, if not scrapped altogether. So all my work on studying these revisions may be for naught, but that's all right. All right, next slide. There we go. So let me give you just a brief overview of the existing RMP rule. This could be a webinar in and of itself, but I just wanted to kind of give you a brief summary of what it is, and then go into enforcement issues that I have seen and EPA has seen, and some legal issues that I've encountered with respect to the RMP. So I always like to step back and look at applicability first. Is your facility even applicable? I mean, does the rule even apply to your facility? So remember, you have to be a stationary source, so not mobile sources. And then the next two are kind of like EPGRA, Form Rs. Do you have more than the threshold quantity of a regulated substance? So you look on the list for what the threshold quantity is and what the list of regulated substances is to see if you trigger both of those. And then it has to be in a process, but process is pretty broad. So like a storage tank or a couple storage tanks together meet the definition of a process. So always step back and see if this even applies to you first. And then if it does apply, then you look to see if you fall into either program 1, 2, or 3. So go to the next slide here. So this is a cool flow chart. I'm a flow chart kind of person. I like figures, charts, and stuff. So this came from one of the guidance documents in the link that I gave you on my first slide. So this it's actually in chapter 2 of that. But anyway, I like, you know, this is a fairly straightforward chart, so you can determine if you're in program level 1, 2, or 3. And basically it's like a risk level. So program level 1 does not affect the public in the event of a release. And then program 2 is a little bit more, and then program 3 is the highest risk. Now, an important point for this, going through this chart, is that program categories apply to a process. So not necessarily a facility. A facility can have more than one process. For example, maybe there are 2 separate tank farms. So they're not co-located. They're in separate parts of the facility. So one could be a program 1 and one could be a program 2. So it's important to remember that each process could be assigned a different program level. Another thing I want to point out is if you see that second diamond up at the top, it's possible to be program level 1 and subject to the OSHA PSM. So you could be low risk and still be subject to the OSHA PSM. So people don't realize that, and they automatically jump to program 2 or program 3 because you're covered under the OSHA PSM. So that's not necessarily the case. Just walk through this flow chart and decide which program you fall into. And then next slide, please. There you go. So if you're triggered, okay, I think it's kind of obvious here. Program 1 will have the least stringent requirements. Program 2 is more, and program 3 is the most stringent. But generally speaking, for all of those, you have to assess the release impacts to sort of do a worst case release scenario. What steps, you know, have like maybe some written procedures, what steps should you take to prevent releases? And then have a plan for emergency response to a release, and then communicate the presence of this plan and the contents of the plan with the local emergency planning commission, and then summarize all this analysis in a risk management plan. And again, this is like super general. You know, I just wanted to cover it very generally so you know what's going on, and that would be a webinar in and of itself. So that being said, I called up EPA Region 6, said, hey, what problems are you seeing most often? And it's very similar to what Conan had just described with respect to OSHA. I guess that's not surprising, right? Because like I said, there's a lot of overlap between both problems, both programs. So if you have a mistake in one, that same mistake will likely carry over to the other program. So the number one problem is failure to conduct mechanical integrity inspections. And that's in 40 CFR 68.73. You know, you have an obligation to inspect all your mechanical parts, fittings, pipes, etc. And EPA said, you know, what they find is that a lot of these facilities will have a control panel, and we'll have a guy sitting behind the control panel making sure everything's great, and they never go out and physically inspect the mechanical integrity to see if a line has become corroded or something like that. So that is the number one enforcement issue that they found. And then sort of similar to that, and it's even in the same CFR section, is the next bullet. Number 2 is finding, EPA finds things that should be inspected but haven't been. So again, you know, let's say, you know, you've got the process screen and someone's watching all the parts and stuff. Well, what if something gets changed and somehow doesn't make it over to the computer screen, or you know, added another valve or something, and nobody's inspected it at all. So there's no record of inspecting something. And I think the most common reason of that is because it's been added or something has changed and no one's gone out there and inspected it. So similar to number 1, And it all has to do with not being in the plant and physically looking at what's going on out there. Third is failure to follow the operating procedures in the RMP. And you know, we see that with SPCC plans, stormwater pollution prevention plans. You got these plans, you put them on the shelf, and nobody does a darn thing. So they see a lot of problems with people not following the procedures in the risk management plan. The next one is another common one that we see, not just with risk management, but with other areas as well, is failure to transfer the management duties when you have a personnel change. You know, in the plan, you're supposed to have a list of positions and what their duties are to prevent releases and respond to accidents, things like that. Well, if you have a change in personnel, did you change their name and their contact information in the plan? And does that person even know what their responsibilities are in the plan? I think often that's overlooked, and that's why that made the list here as a common enforcement issue. And then finally, and this is one that Conan mentioned again in OSHA, is failure to implement findings and recommendations when there's an audit. Just like when OSHA conducts an inspection or an audit, when EPA conducts an inspection or audit, they give you a list of things you should change. And it's just surprising to me. A lot of this just doesn't get done, so then they get dinged for that. This one I love. This one gets people all the time. It makes more work for me. So, the general duty clause. This has been around for a while, but EPA, especially Region 6, has made this a big moneymaker. It's also in the Clean Air Act, which is where the RMP section came from. But the bottom line here is, you know, I went through the applicability section earlier, thresholds, regulated substances, all that. Well, that's great, but this is broader than that, and this does not, just because the other stuff doesn't apply does not mean that this does not apply to you. So here, what does it apply to? It applies to any stationary source producing, processing, handling, or storing regulated substances. Well, that's like practically everything, right? I mean, that is extremely broad and can apply to just almost any facility. And it's not the same as the RMP regulations. And all this says, you have a general duty to have a program in place that recognizes the hazards that are posed by the chemicals at your facility and have some processes in place to prevent accidental releases and minimize the consequences in the event of a release. So that's a pretty low bar. And it should be fairly easy, but people just overlook this. You could put a small program in place, just a little written procedure about what to do in the event of a release or how to prevent releases. But so many facilities don't. EPA goes out there and inspects, and it's easy money. A couple examples. These are things that will most likely trigger an EPA inspection, and they're going to look at this general duty clause, whether or not the RMP even applies. So if you have a spill or a fire, like I had a client that her oil well was producing, and there was a fire out there. So not surprisingly, she expected OSHA to be there to inspect it, but she didn't expect EPA to show up. So she called me. She's like, why is EPA out here? And that's why. There was a fire, and EPA inspected and said, where's your plan to prevent fires and what to do in the event of a fire? So that just, it's kind of a double hit. She gets OSHA and she got EPA to show up as well. So this is one that's just so commonly overlooked. So if you're sitting here now after this webinar going, oh shoot, I didn't know this stuff applies to me. That's okay. You don't have to panic. You don't have to panic. I just wanted to mention here that EPA has an e-disclosure program. It used to be just called like their self-disclosure program, but now it's all done electronically. You can do a self-audit and voluntarily disclose violations that you've encountered, and EPA will reduce or eliminate enforcement action, and so that's nice. They also have an exemption for new owners. So if you just purchased a facility and oops, there's some mistakes that were in place from the prior owner, you can invoke that as well as a defense. And they also have an audit program for small businesses. So these are all helpful tools. You can consult your favorite environmental attorney for more information on this, and they can tell you how and if you can invoke these to help protect yourself if you think you might be out of compliance and you're worried about EPA coming out and finding it before you disclose it. So those are my comments in a nutshell here. But we wanted to give you all a lot of time here for questions because this is a very complex set of topics. So Lance, do we have any questions?
We do not have any questions so far, but we'll give them a chance to type them out. See.
Great. One question that I get a lot while we're waiting for people to type is the interaction between OSHA's VPP, voluntary program, with EPA, and I mentioned their self-audit program here. So if somebody's in the OSHA VPP, does that shield them from EPA inspections? And in typical EPA form, say, well, probably, but not 100%. So most likely they will leave you alone if you're in the VPP, but of course, just with OSHA, if you have a release or an accident, fire, something, all bets are off, and EPA can certainly inspect you. And EPA does have certain industries that they're targeting, although with my recent call to EPA, wouldn't tell me what those industries are. but if they're targeting your industry, you might still get audited anyway. But they are trying to respect OSHA's VPP and not come in and inspect you if you're already in the OSHA VPP.
Hey, Cindy, this is Don DeRavage. I was just looking at it from your slide about the general duty clauses and the like. Have you seen anything from the use of that segment of the regulation where they're critical of how you analyzed the incident that you might have had and whether or not it needed to be considered that way? Is there much question to that? Because I've seen in the regulations recently related regulations to other industries, MAC standards, NSPS, and the rest, where it seems like root cause analysis really is the criteria by which people are measuring those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good comment because, EPA's position is, well, if you'd had a decent plan in place, there wouldn't have been this fire or there wouldn't have been this spill or whatever. So it kind of puts the company on the defensive right away. And so I think it's better to be more thorough and do like a root cause analysis or something like that to help protect you, because EPA comes down really hard. They're very critical on how effective these plans are and how detailed they have been.
So we must have been extremely efficient in our information because we don't have any questions, Cindy. So,
wow, we could like sing a song or something. You'd have to go back and go into more detail, right? But yeah, both of these are such critical programs. I'm really glad we had this webinar on this, and I do think that they're often overlooked. And when we've seen that from the enforcement from both OSHA and EPA, and it's important that the audience knows that just complying with one doesn't mean you comply with the other. So you've got to look at both programs independently. You may be able to have like one plan to cover both things, but you got to make sure that you look at both of those.
All right. Don, Conan, do you have anything else to add before I close?
I believe we covered it.
Okay.
I think so too. Just as a general reminder, though, I'd say, as much as there are a lot of different regulations under review by the current administration, many of the regulations are still in place, and there isn't a review on some of those existing ones, especially both these regulations were started back in the 1990s. So be very considerate about that as you move forward.
And of course,
Yes.
we're here to answer any questions that you guys may have on a consulting basis. You can contact W&M, or on a legal aspect, you can also call Cindy, and there's her contact information on the screen right there. And you can also, if you have any questions later on, and you say, hey, I don't know where I put those contact numbers, you can also contact me at any time as well. So, and there are 6 locations in Texas that we just wanted to show you, and with, of course, our newest office in Corpus Christi. So thank you, panel, Cindy, Conan, Don, and Lori, for listening and being with us today. So again, I'm going to be sending out this presentation probably in a couple hours as soon as we download it, and so you can be able to watch this at your convenience or pass it on to your friends. So everybody have a great week.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.